What happens when a woman's arrogance leads her to insult the very person who holds her career in his hands? In a moment of careless judgment, Karen learns the hard way that karma has a way of catching up, especially when the man she mocked turns out to be her CEO. It was a bustling Monday morning in the corporate building, the hum of busy office workers and the sharp click of heels echoing through the polished marble floors. The elevators, ever in demand during peak hours, were the most common battleground for patience. Among the steady flow of people, there was Karen. Middle-aged, impeccably groomed, and radiating an air of entitlement, she was the type of person who believed the world revolved around her. Today, however, she seemed especially irritated, her usual irritation aimed at anyone who wasn't keeping up with her pace. The elevator doors opened, and inside stood a man in his mid-40s, dressed sharply in a tailored suit. He was calm and composed, a stark contrast to the flustered Karen. He sat in a wheelchair, his face thoughtful and unbothered, as though the daily grind had no power over him. His presence, dignified yet subtle, was enough to grab the attention of anyone who noticed, though most people simply glanced away, uncomfortable with his visible disability. As Karen stepped into the elevator, her eyes flicked to the man in the wheelchair with a brief look of disdain. She stood beside him, her posture stiff and impatient, her body language radiating frustration. Two other office workers stood near the back of the elevator, watching the interaction unfold with quiet curiosity, unsure whether to intervene or simply mind their own business. As the elevator doors slid shut, Karen let out a frustrated sigh, her eyes narrowing as she glanced at the man in the wheelchair. His presence, though dignified and composed, seemed to annoy her. She shifted her weight impatiently, clearly displeased by the fact that the elevator wasn't moving as quickly as she'd hoped. With a dismissive glance, she muttered, "You're taking up too much space." Her voice was sharp, carrying just enough venom to make it clear that she wasn't happy with the situation. "Move over," she snapped, as if it were his responsibility to adjust his entire body to her convenience. Her tone was condescending, and her eyes flicked to the other passengers as if to say, "Can you believe this?" The disabled man, unmoved by her rude comment, smiled slightly. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Karen's irritation. He didn't respond, didn't engage with her in any way, but merely shifted his position in the wheelchair so she could stand a little more comfortably. His actions were deliberate and kind, yet silent. Karen, however, wasn't satisfied. "I hate how they make these elevators so slow just because some people can't walk. It's so inconvenient," she continued, her voice dripping with entitlement. "You should have just taken the stairs." The other passengers in the elevator exchanged uncomfortable glances. They could sense the tension in the air, but were too unsure of what to do. Should they intervene? Or was this a battle best left to the two people involved? It was a moment of awkward silence, and yet, Karen seemed oblivious to the weight of her words. The elevator ascended slowly, the soft hum of the machinery doing little to mask the tension building between Karen and the man in the wheelchair. Karen's impatience grew with each passing floor. She continued to mutter insults under her breath, her words laced with bitterness. "It's people like him who make everything slower," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper, but dripping with disdain. "I can't believe they make the rest of us wait just because he needs extra time." Her eyes darted to him again, her irritation only growing as he moved slowly but steadily in his wheelchair, unaffected by her comments. "People like him should just get out of the way," she sneered, her words laced with cruelty. "Taking up space, blocking everyone. Maybe he should stick to the back where he belongs." The disabled man's expression remained unchanged, his gaze focused ahead. Despite the sting of her words, he said nothing, choosing instead to maintain his calm and silent dignity. His silence only seemed to make Karen angrier, but she could feel something shift within herself as she watched him. His composed manner was a stark contrast to her growing frustration. As the elevator approached the top floor, Karen felt a slight shift in the atmosphere. Something about the way the man carried himself made her uneasy. He didn't seem bothered by her insults. It was as though he knew something she didn't. She caught a glimpse of his calm, almost knowing smile, and for the first time doubt crept into her mind. Was this man really just someone she could dismiss so easily? The elevator doors dinged as they arrived at Karen's floor. But to her surprise, the disabled man didn't move. He simply pressed the button for the next floor, his expression still calm and composed. Karen stood frozen for a moment, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. Why hadn't he exited? She shifted uncomfortably, her mind still buzzing with annoyance. As she glanced at him, her eyes began to linger on details she had missed earlier. The sharp cut of his suit, the immaculate tailoring, and the subtle luxury of his accessories. It was the kind of suit she'd expect to see on someone high up in the corporate world. Her discomfort deepened, but she couldn't place why it felt so important now. Karen glanced toward the floor directory on the wall, where names were listed next to each floor. Her eyes caught a name that made her heart stop. David Knight, the name she had seen before but never paid much attention to, the CEO of the company. The man she had been reporting to for months without ever meeting in person. A cold wave of realization washed over her. The man in the wheelchair, the one she had insulted, the one she had dismissed as an inconvenience, was her boss. The CEO, the very person who controlled her job and career. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of her words hit her all at once. Every rude comment, every dismissive glance, every cruel remark had been directed at the man who had the power to change her life, forever. Karen's heart pounded in her chest as the realization settled in. The man she had mocked, the one she had belittled without a second thought, was her CEO, the person who controlled her career and her future. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and she fumbled for words. Her voice trembled as she stammered, trying to salvage what was left of the situation. I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to offend you, Karen blurted, her face turning crimson. She glanced at him, her eyes wide with panic, desperately trying to backtrack. I was just frustrated. I didn't know. Look, I'm sorry. Please, I didn't mean anything by it. You know how these elevators are, right? It's not what I... Her words tumbled out in a chaotic rush, completely incoherent as her embarrassment swelled by the second. She could feel the weight of his silence pressing down on her, and every attempt at an apology only seemed to make things worse. The awkwardness hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The other passengers in the elevator awkwardly shifted, not daring to intervene. The disabled man, still calm and composed, looked at her with a slight, almost amused smile. His eyes glinted with quiet understanding, but he didn't say a word. Instead, he pressed the button for the next floor again, his movements slow and deliberate, giving Karen a few more moments to feel the full weight of the situation. His silence was more powerful than any words he could have spoken, and Karen's panic grew with each passing second. The elevator doors opened at the next floor, and without a word, the disabled man wheeled himself out, still composed and calm. As he passed through the doors, Karen caught a glimpse of his expression, a faint, almost amused smile, but no anger or malice. He didn't need to say anything. The damage had already been done. Karen's face was flushed red with shame, her body stiff from the weight of the moment. She stood there, stunned, as the elevator doors closed behind him. Her mind raced and her heart sank with the sudden realization of just how badly she had misjudged the situation. What had she done? Her mind replayed her words. The insults, the dismissive comments, and the horrific truth hit her hard. She had insulted the very person who could determine her future at the company. The CEO. The man who, unbeknownst to her, had been silently judging her behavior all along. Her careless, hurtful words could cost her everything. Karen's stomach twisted as the elevator continued its ascent. She couldn't shake the heavy feeling that had settled deep inside her. There would be consequences. She was certain of that, and she had no one to blame but herself. As the elevator reached her floor, the doors slid open, and Karen stepped out into the hallway. She paused for a moment, reflecting on her behavior, the arrogance, the sense of superiority that had driven her to act so cruelly. She had thought herself better than the man in the wheelchair, but now she saw how deeply mistaken she truly was. The tension lingered, heavy in the air, as she walked away, uncertain of what the future held.